Edgar, good morning.
Good morning.
Edgar Odari is the Executive Director of News Africa. He joins us now in the Situation Room. Welcome to the hot seat, Edgar.
Thank you.
Good to have you again.
Thank you.
When you hear this proverb from Tanzania, because we're talking East Africa Community Day, that's how we picked a Tanzanian proverb. Figure that.
Yeah.
Eh?
Oh, wow. How strategic.
Yeah, we do things with a plan.
Of course.
Yes,
That's
we
the
have a
way.
plan. We have a president who has a plan. So everybody here must have a plan. When you hear that proverb, what do you think?
Well, it basically means, as I interpret it as a country, we have to do our own growth, despite the fact that we are working together with other partners. We have to do our own growth.
We have to do our own heavy lifting.
Yes.
Aha.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's a good thing that President Uhuru Kenyatta also embraced closely.
Yes.
And he went out into the UK, met with his counterpart, not the counterpart, but the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and they discussed how can we work together. Now with this Brexit story
Yes.
that has happened,
Yes.
how can we work together with the UK? And they signed a number of agreements. One of them was, an economic trade agreement with the UK. Tell us about that.
Well, because the UK was leaving the European Union, they thought about how do we maintain relations with most of the other partners that we trade with. And out of that came the desire to sign an economic partnership agreement with Kenya. It was supposed to be with East African Community, but the other East African Community countries had not even signed an agreement with the European Union. So they opted out of the agreement. But Kenya, given its position, decided to sign the agreement. Yes.
With the UK?
Yes.
What are the details and the contents of this agreement?
Well, it basically talks about a number of goods. It basically opens up trade in terms of liberalizing trade on a number of goods that are supposed to be traded between the two countries. So it basically says it reduces tariffs. Tariffs are basically taxes. It reduces taxes on products coming in from the UK and reduces taxes of products going into the UK.
From Kenya?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So goods coming in from the UK,
Yes.
if they land at the port of Mombasa,
Yes.
but their final destination is any of the landlocked East African countries, how does that impact that agreement?
That is a problem because then, we operate as a customs union. So when a good lands in a port in Dar es Salaam or a port in Mombasa, it's as if the good has landed in the territory. So the good is free to circulate within the territory of the customs union.
Okay.
So that means it's a problem in the sense that if the good has been reduced in terms of the tariff has been reduced and the good has landed in Mombasa, it's as if the good has landed in Uganda. Yes.
So a tractor that was meant to go to some farm in Burundi
Yes.
lands in Mombasa.
Yes.
The UK exporter expects to enjoy the benefit of the economic partnership agreement signed between Kenya and...
So a tractor that was supposed, let me rephrase it this way.
Right.
A tractor that is supposed to go to a farm in Moiben, not a tractor. Tractors are zero rated. Take another good iron.
Okay.
That was supposed to go to a factory in Kenya.
Okay.
Now, that good can be able to land at any place in Burundi, Uganda, or Tanzania. The challenge with that is these countries have what we call a common external tariff,
Okay.
which is basically to try and reduce the cheap imports coming in from outside regions.
Okay.
So when this good lands here, it's competing against the other products in the East African community. Yes.
Okay. What does that then mean for then goods going on to other countries? If it lands, because it's saying East African community, so obviously it's a common market,
Yes.
right? So just as you said, if it lands in Mombasa, it's just as though it landed in Uganda or if it landed in Tanzania. Now, what does that mean in terms of it going into these other countries. So if it lands in Mombasa,
Yes.
it can just as well go to Uganda without
Yes.
too much of an issue.
Yes.
Nobody's going to stop it, ask for extra tariffs, things like this.
Yes.
Okay. Now, and I think because what we are looking at now is if Kenya has an agreement with another country bilaterally that doesn't then include this brotherhood of markets in the East African region, what happens? Does it still remain the same if now you want to push that same good to the other members of the market?
The challenge with that is that it undermines the industrialization policy of the region. Because what happens is, some of these goods some of the goods under the East African community and under the Kenya-UK EPA have been zero rated. What that means is basically they come in tax-free.
Yes.
Except under the East African community, these countries have agreed these goods are going to have a higher taxes if they are coming from outside to protect local industries.
Right.
Yeah. So when this good comes in at a zero rated tax rate and it is competing against East African community manufacturers who have decided to give it a bit of higher taxes to be able to trade within themselves, it means that they're going to be undermined. Yes, it undermines trade within the region.
Why would Kenya sign this kind of deal? That on the one hand, we have signed locally within the East African community a trade pact that says, a pact that says we want to protect East African industries.
Yes.
And then Kenya goes and signs this deal with the UK that allows goods to come in tax-free. What is the rationale for Kenya?
There's, at the time when this agreement was being signed, we even met with the Parliamentary Committee on Trade and raised our concerns. But, first of all, maybe let me point out that the agreement that was signed was a copy-paste of another agreement. They didn't even bother to sit down and look at the nitty-gritty. They just copy-pasted another agreement, the East African Community EU Economic Partnership Agreement. So can you imagine this? The concessions that were given to 27 countries
In the EU.
Are the same concessions you're giving to one country. It doesn't make sense. So for me, if you ask me, the rationale would have, a more rational approach would have been to sit and negotiate a totally new agreement and go through the products line by line to determine, do we want this to be zero rated? And in any case, they should have put a clause to say the East African community, a common external tariff applies, and where it applies, the UK EPA cannot apply. But they didn't do that.
Would it be of benefit to us if we did all those things?
It would be.
How?
It would be because if we did all those things, number one, we wouldn't be struggling now. Like you see now, the UK has woken up and said, we signed this agreement at a time when we were still negotiating the common external tariff with the EAC.
Yeah.
So the UK has woken up and said, hey guys, this animal you're calling the common external tariff cannot apply to us.
So by the time we were signing the EPA with the UK,
Yes.
the common external tariff within the EAC
Yes.
had not gone into effect.
No.
So EAC common external tariff comes into effect after Kenya has already signed the deal with the UK.
Yes.
And now the UK says
You can't apply the common external tariff.
Right. That's a nice problem to have, isn't it?
It was a good problem.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yes.
So, I want to go back a little bit because you're talking about going back and renegotiating. When these negotiations are happening, are these things taken into consideration that what would benefit individual countries and then what would benefit countries as a whole? Also understanding that if the EAC benefits in one way or another, or I don't know how many now, or how many countries of them, and that individual countries benefit, is that taken into consideration over and above this kind of, good relationship you want to have with external trading partners?
It should be. It should be taken into consideration.
Over and above that.
Yes,
Yeah.
it should be taken into consideration because you see, our biggest market is Uganda. So for me, I'd rather get, Tononoka Steel? I'd rather get Tononoka Steel supplying their steel all the way into Uganda than have steel products coming in from the UK. Yeah? So it's more beneficial to have trade within the region, between the countries, because then that's a much bigger market for our traders to compete. But now if you have a situation where you're bringing in competition from outside the region and you're not considering the interests of local producers, then it becomes a bit difficult to understand the rationale with which some of our negotiators go into this room. And it's not that they don't know. They know these things
know
very
this.
well. I just don't understand what
And
happens.
they can project ahead.
Yes.
So basically left a back door open
Yes.
for the UK,
Yes.
as far as it is,
Yes.
to actually access 300 million strong market
Yes.
within the East African community.
Certainly.
Just like that.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, on the front door, we are all bolting the door together with the other partner states of the East African community saying UK should not be able to come and we should protect ourselves from a giant UK
Yes.
manufacturer
Yes.
by supporting our local manufacturers.
So on the one hand, you're protecting yourself, and on the other hand, you're opening. So it's a game of chickens. You really don't know what you want to do.
How should it be?
The way it should be is, number one, first of all, in terms of negotiating, we should negotiate as a region. There is absolutely no benefit in negotiating as one country. You see, the UK is the 6th biggest economy in the world. Kenya is way below that. And you're negotiating and calling yourselves negotiating as equals. You're not equals. You're not. The better thing and the more cleverer thing would be you negotiate as the East African community and agree you're going to negotiate with the UK as one entity. And what you're going to apply to Uganda and Tanzania is the same thing that's going to apply to Kenya.
Right?
Yes.
That's a logical way to go.
Yes.
However, our brothers don't see the logic. That's a problem. Like you said, the EAC countries did not want, they had not signed a pact with the EU. They were not interested in this pact with the UK. So what do we do?
So there's a mechanism to do that because they call it variable geometry, that one country can decide to go a different direction if the others are not yet ready to do that. But even application of that should follow the rules that have been set aside in the East African Customs Union Protocol. What it requires is the moment you start negotiating an agreement, you notify the Secretary General of the East African Community within 30 days. Then the SG is supposed to notify the other countries, and they're supposed to give comments to that agreement within 90 days. That was not done. It wasn't.
And that would have been an easy route.
Yes. So you notify them, and then they say, okay, if you are giving these products away, please consider products A, B, C, and D,
right,
and put this tariff because we are going to negotiate this interest in the common external tariff. Or the easier thing would have been to wait.
In those 90 days,
Yes.
if you get comment, the SG has circulated this to the other
Yes.
member states of the
Yes.
East African community.
Yes.
If any of the member states actually writes a strong protest note in
Yes.
response to the AG,
Yes.
to the SG,
Yes.
is it binding?
It should be, especially in terms of the products. They should say, you see, we want, so for example, Tanzania can come and say, under the common external tariff, we want to apply this tariff on this product. So then Kenya should take that into consideration and say, okay, as we're negotiating with the UK, we want to put this tariff because Tanzania has an interest here. Because in any case, Tanzania has an interest in the Kenyan market, or Kenya has an interest in the Tanzanian market and vice versa. Yes.
Within the EA, I mean, okay, and this maybe could give insight as to why then, because it seems as though, yes, there is the EAC. We're looking at common markets. We're looking at ways in which individual countries can benefit. We're also looking at ways in which the region as a whole then can benefit. But it seems as though, I mean, I think it's clearly evident that there is then still infighting amongst the brothers.
Yes.
Or a lack of a desire to want to come together. Wouldn't that have been one of the tenets upon which this market of the EAC was established in the first place? That there would be this brotherhood in terms of markets, at least on one level, to say that these negotiations, when they take place, so when Kenya is going and is having bilateral negotiations with the UK, Kenya is taking into consideration the EAC as well. Is that what we are saying? Because then what happens to your authenticity as a state? Does that then change because you're constantly considering what happens with the common market?
Like I said, our biggest market is in the region. if you look, I know we export products to the UK, and that's significant, but we have a much better approach in terms of trying to target the local market. The biggest market for Kenya is Uganda. So for me, in terms of trying to look for interests, wouldn't you want to look at the interests of your local market first before you start venturing to the other places?
So I hear you saying essentially that all of these negotiations, when now all this noise is currently being made, is that then it really shouldn't bear that much significance when it comes to the trade that Kenya will do,
No, it should. It should bear significance.
as much as that which you place on the surrounding region.
No.
Okay, let me rephrase the
Yes,
question.
yes.
Should more weight then be placed on the trade negotiations that Kenya has with Uganda, for example, vis-a-vis the negotiations that would be made between Kenya and the UK?
The clever thing would be to place more emphasis on regional markets.
Okay.
Yes. It would be to place more emphasis on regional markets because they have a chance to grow. We have just opened up DRC.
Yep.
So it will be more clever to open up the regional market for Kenyan products as opposed to opening up the Kenyan market to external products because then they would eat into the share of the Kenyan market that the Kenyan products have in the region. Yes.
So Uganda is Kenya's biggest trade partner.
Yes.
What does that mean?
What it means is basically, well, if you look at the kind of products that we export across to any other country, look at Kenya's external trade.
Yeah.
Uganda is the biggest export market for Kenyan products.
What do we export to Uganda?
We export manufactures, especially manufactured product, finished products. And these finished products are then consumed by the Ugandan market. Now, if we open up trade with the UK,
So manufactured products, these are goods manufactured 100% in Kenya.
yes. Not necessarily 100%. We may be able to get intermediate goods from elsewhere, but we finish the product and export it to Uganda.
Okay.
Yes.
Transit does not count as part of exports.
No,
Goods that land in Mombasa on transit to Uganda,
that
is not Kenya.
That's not Kenya's export.
Export to Uganda.
No.
So this is basically everything that we have produced here, whether
Yes.
it's raw or finished.
Yes.
And mostly you're saying it's finished
Yes.
products
Yes.
going into the region.
Yes.
Now, how do we make sure that our factories are able to produce more and be more efficient in production?
The first thing you do is you lock out competition from outside. Yes. You lock out competition from outside. So you sit down and say, okay, there's a number of tariff lines. Tariff lines are basically product lines of what needs to be liberalized. You lock out those lines and say, for all these products, I am not going to allow products to come in from outside. And if they come in, I will apply the East African Community Common External Tariff. That way, your manufacturers have some sort of safety net to say that when products come in from outside, they're going to, first of all, be taxed at a higher rate than local products. That way, when those products, because they're heavily subsidized when they come in from countries like the UK. So when you tax them higher, they'll have to sell at a rate that is favorable to Kenyan exporters.
Okay.
Yes.
But then also, locally, we are relying heavily on raw material that is either locally produced, coming from the region,
Yes.
or coming from outside the region.
Yes.
All right?
Yes.
So that then we're able to finish and export to Uganda and the other countries in the East Africa community.
So if
Does
you-
this EPA include raw material coming in from the UK so that it can be processed in Kenyan factories?
So if you look at the common external tariff, it used to have 3 bands. Now I think they've made it 4 bands. The first band was intermediate products, so primary product that you're using to add value in your industries, which the rate was about 65.4%, if I'm not wrong. So there's already a provision to allow in raw materials to be
Okay.
used in factories to be able to produce goods, and the rate was about 65.4%. Yes.
Second band?
Second band was, I'm not sure, it was about 75%. Yes.
And what kind of goods are these?
These are products that have been added value extensively beyond the 65.4%.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
So basically, we are saying if it's raw material that can come and then it's processed within Kenyan factories, it's okay.
Yes.
Or within the factories within
Yes.
the East African
Yes.
community, that's fine.
That's fine.
But when you start processing,
Then the
if
tariffs
there's
go
some
up.
value addition, then the tariff goes up.
Yes.
Logic to lock out
Yes.
competition for local manufacturers.
Yes.
So again, I ask, what was the logic used by our government, very experienced people, when they were discussing this deal with the UK? In fact, let's start this question from this point. Do you see sense in President Uhuru Kenyatta having a sit down with former President Uhuru, having a sit down with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson and saying, all right, Brexit has happened. How do we take advantage of one another? Was there a sense in that?
There was sense.
The beginning of that conversation.
The UK is a big market for Kenya, so there was sense.
There was sense in that.
Yes.
Higher. Second sense, in the negotiations.
Yes.
Do you see sense in what they did?
No.
Why?
What do you think they were thinking of?
They
when you
had-
try to look back and say, maybe this was the thinking of, then you also have contacts with these people. What is it that they were considering?
So there was sense in the sense to negotiate an agreement with the UK. What does not make sense is the way the agreement was negotiated. It's one thing to say you're negotiating an agreement, but you don't just copy paste an entire agreement and say, okay, we've negotiated. What is that or even? I mean, when you're negotiating and you're saying, okay, let me just copy paste this agreement and hammer it and say, I understand there was urgency in terms of negotiating with the UK.
Yeah.
But it does, if you really want to burn the midnight oil, they could have just sat down, negotiated a totally new agreement, but they sat down and copy-pasted an agreement with the EU.
Do you think we had leverage at that point as
Yes, we
Kenya?
did.
Kenya have leverage
We did.
at the negotiating
We
table?
did.
And could Kenya have been a little bit more bullish in its argument to say, look here, and I think maybe, I know we're going into a break in a minute, and we can come back and look at this, but I think this is the problem. That when you're actually at the table, because you never ever really get there, finally at the table, what is discussed at the table to entrench that there will be benefit on the side of those who are already getting the shorter end of the stick. And I think if those things are not happening at the manner in which they ought to, that's why we continue finding, especially countries on this other side of the G, suffering these things. And so why is it that these negotiations do not happen in the manner in which they ought to?
I think the reason is, part of the reason is just lack of foresight. I would say lack of foresight. Because for me, when you're negotiating, the UK and the EU are totally different entities. So for you to copy paste one agreement and say it applies to the other, when the concessions that were given to 27 countries, like I said, you're giving the same concessions to one country with no benefit in terms of a bigger market. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't. So for me, the way the negotiations are being carried out, at the very least, it would have called for people to sit down and hammer out a totally new agreement. Yes. Yeah.
There was ground for that.
Yeah.
Let's take a break. Edgar Odari is our guest this morning. He is the Executive Director of EcoNews Africa. Tell us about EcoNews Africa, by the way, briefly, just before you take this break.
Yes. So EcoNews Africa is a non-governmental organization that works to bridge the information gaps between various stakeholders. So we look at government, we look at private sector, we look at citizens. So in our case, there's information asymmetry between these entities in terms of decision making, especially on economic decisions. So what we try to do is basically to try and limit that information gap by providing information to the citizens to be able to enable them to make informed decisions.
Okay.
Yes.
He's here in the studio with us discussing the little kind of a quagmire that we're finding ourselves in. So Kenya signed an economic partnership agreement with the UK, and it was ratified even in Parliament in 2021, right?
Yes.
And then a couple of months later, the East African Common Markets, the East African Community's Common External Tariff came into effect. Now, what that means is that while the Common External Tariff by the EAC says we shall lock out some goods coming in from areas outside the EAC, our economic partnership agreement with the UK says some goods can come in from the UK through Kenya. And then they'll find their way into the market. Bit of a pickle.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
With Edgar Odari from EcoNews Africa, we are talking about the Kenya's trade pact with the UK, as well as Kenya's agreements within the East African community. So, Edgar, you've basically taken us through where we are finding ourselves now, which is the UK says this new thing called the East African Common External Tariff should not apply to goods coming from the UK into Kenya. And yet the Common External Tariff within the EAC says all goods coming into Kenya, Uganda, wherever within the EAC should be subjected to this tariff. So now that we find ourselves here, what next? What are the next steps?
Well, no agreement is cast in stone. When this agreement was being negotiated, I remember a number of parliamentarians were really concerned about what was going to happen, and they put in a clause in terms of the government would have to be reporting to Parliament every year on processes of implementing the agreement and challenges in terms of implementing the agreement. This clause was inserted at the last minute because Parliament was concerned that this agreement would go as is and would cause problems for the country. So that's the time now to use that clause. And thank God the parliamentarians actually saw the sense in that. It might be good to now wake up and say, hey, wait a minute, let's sit and remove all the products where the common external tariff is supposed to apply.
When do the first 2 years lapse?
Not the first 2 years. They said annually.
So it's annually.
It's annually.
Okay.
They're supposed to report annually. Yes.
And then so report annually and subject to review annually.
Yes.
Right. What would you advise parliamentarians to do? We have a new parliament, the 13th
Yes.
parliament.
The best thing for Parliament to do now would be to now sit and sift through those tariff lines. And any tariff lines that offends the spirit of the common external tariff should be removed from that agreement.
Would it be beneficial or not to
It will be
Kenya?
beneficial because local industries are going to suffer for it. Local industries are going to suffer for it in the sense that they are going to face stiff competition of cheap, subsidized products coming in from the... Look at this, for example. Energy in the UK is much cheaper than energy locally. So when you have steel producers importing into the region, even in terms of energy alone, forget about the other benefits in terms of subsidies that they get from their government. Even in terms of energy alone, they are beating you hands down. So they can be able to bring in their products at a much cheaper rate and be able to compete within the region. Now, if you have Tononoka Steel sending products to Uganda, that means the Uganda exporter can be able to say, hey, you know what? Let me get the UK steel. And that will
And
mean...
import in Uganda.
Yes. They'll export to Uganda and deny Tononoka Steel the market, for example.
Okay, let's look on the other side.
Yes.
Because clear. The case is made. I don't think you need to dig deeper to
Yes.
to see the benefit
Yes.
of then fighting for this common market on this side. Also,
Yes.
in terms of elevating economies within this East African market.
Yes.
What benefit? Because then to kind of understand why the negotiations were made in the manner in which they were, what would it benefit Kenya to have? Because this is what we're talking about right now. That this negotiation or this agreement that currently is held with the UK does just that. That you are allowing product essentially into the market that could be cheaper, and that you are denying a domiciled market the opportunity to thrive. Why would you have such an agreement? Kenya, the UK, Uganda, the UK, Tanzania, the UK, and deny? What benefit would it be to have an agreement crafted in that manner?
An agreement with the UK.
Yes. Why would you
Well,
want to do that?
the UK is an export market for our horticultural products. We export a lot of flowers. We export tea and other primary commodities to the UK.
Yes.
So because of that, the UK is an important market. Now, what you do with such a market is, yes, you give them access to your market, but you don't consider everything. Yeah? You can be able to give them... It's actually makes sense. It's entirely possible to have a situation where the UK is able to gain access to Kenyan market without necessarily offending the spirit of the East African Community Customs Union. Yes.
So, again, taking this just a step further, the UK themselves, and we're just using them as an example because this is what is on the table right
Yes.
now.
Yep.
Yes.
The UK themselves also have trade negotiations with other countries.
Yes.
And we can look into those and get the details for
Yes.
sure, because such things are made public.
Yes.
Excuse me. Do they protect their local industries when they are making these trade negotiations?
You wouldn't want to imagine. They protect their local industry as if their life depends on it, because it does. Now, what usually happens with these negotiations is you have the industry coming together and saying, hey, open up this market for us, close this product for us. And they have done that extensively for their market. And that's part of the reason why they actually, Brexit is based on that. They wanted to protect their markets from external interference in terms of, they tell you, if you bring in an orange, it must be this round and this color and whatnot. They want to protect their market. Now, when we were negotiating this agreement with the UK, manufacturers came. Can you imagine they even liberalized waste paper? That you can be able to get waste paper coming in from the UK to come in. When we have, I think it's, what family is this? The Rai family.
The Rai family.
Which is basically, and he was there, by the way. He was there, by the way, protesting that kind of
So we've
situation.
opened up our markets to all types of goods.
All types of, including waste paper.
If we were to renegotiate this, and then, of course, it's quid pro quo, what are we risking? If we say, all right, so we want to renegotiate, you see, we've got the East African Common External Tariff, blah, blah, blah. So let's relook at this trade deal we have with you.
Yes.
What is it that we are likely to lose? And what should we guard against losing?
What we guard against losing is losing access to the UK market, except the amount of trading, because you see, the UK did this with the idea that it would eventually be able to gain access to the EAC market. So we still have a bit of leverage to take us forward. And if you look at the risk, I don't think the UK would wake up to an extent and close out the entire market to Kenya because we've taken out a few products that are part of our common external tariff.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Now that we operated this way, selfishly, Kenya went ahead and signed a deal with the UK, man, as our brothers and sisters in the region.
Yeah.
Is it possible, or would it be beneficial for any of the other countries, let's say Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, to go and sign their own trade agreements with the UK, where the UK then breaks up our leverage? That thing of saying, we're giving you access into the East African common market. Can they do a divide and rule and start seeking to negotiate individually with the other countries? And would it be, if you are the president of Rwanda or Burundi or Tanzania, would you pursue such a deal?
What this agreement has done is it has a grandfather clause, in the sense that it cleverly talks about the other East African countries, so that at the time when the East African countries want to negotiate, they are bound. They'll be told, okay, you can't negotiate a separate agreement. Just come into this agreement with Kenya and let's have it as one region. Yes.
So we have already taken that. We've locked that side.
We've locked that side
And said, anybody else who wants to negotiate with the UK, you've got to
sign on to the
get onto
Kenyan
this
sector.
one.
Yes.
Join onto this one.
Yes.
So then we have leverage.
We have leverage.
Okay.
We have leverage for sure.
So then what is the, because there's always, is that thing that you need to then cross over to make sure that you are actually now swimming freely or swimming well,
Yes.
at the very least.
Yes.
What is it? What is it that then needs to happen to break this? Because it doesn't matter. Look, and I'm sure if you look across the continent, look at SADC, look at, again,
Yes,
COMESA, look at ECOWAS, look at the EAC, you will have that problem. Even when you have regional trading blocks, and then there's an external, and I'm talking ex-Africa, if there's an external partner, you will always find, and I'm still on that, I guess that's a sticking point, you will always find that there is something that guarantees that we on this side of the pond get the shorter end of the stick. Do we have negotiation problems? It definitely is not policy issues, because we probably have some of the greatest minds who are even going and to help make these decisions on the other side. Is it negotiation? Do we get into the room and then get nervous? Because, it's down to the wire. Do we copy paste an agreement, they copy paste an agreement, and we read it and we say, oh, jolly good, that's great, let's go ahead with it. What happens? Or what needs to happen? Because this is not just an EAC problem. It's a COMESA problem. It's a SADC problem.
Yes.
It's an ECOWAS problem.
Yes.
What is the problem?
The problem that we have is who we take into the negotiation room. The moment you have an agreement like that and you're saying, okay, the PS is the negotiating person, the PS deals with administrative issues at that level. What you need to do is get the real hard negotiators, the technocrats. Get them into the room and tell them, okay, guys, whatever you do, hammer out an agreement that's in my interest. But the moment you say that, you have the chief negotiator being the permanent secretary, Ministry of Trade, this person comes in and, first of all, they may not have the luxury. They're balancing so many issues at the same time. They may not have time to start going through a list of 1,000 plus products.
Come on, Edgar. I mean, it's not like it's just the PS who walks into the room and he's not accompanied or she's not accompanied by the technocrats that we're talking about. It's not like the PS goes in there without having received a brief from the officials or even coming out of the meeting and saying, okay, so this is what they are offering. So what is our next step? I don't imagine that it's just a one person getting into a room and negotiating a deal for the country.
The point I'm trying to make is that decisions at that level are carried out by the PS. Yeah,
as they should. I mean, it's a senior.
Yes.
You don't want a junior officer to go and sign a deal on behalf of the country.
Junior officer doesn't sign a deal. Let me tell you how China does. China comes into a room and they come in with a number of negotiators.
Okay.
And these young guys, the lower cadre guys, they're the ones who are playing hardball with you. And by the time they get to that person who is making the final decision...
So the final decision maker is just quiet.
They don't even talk.
He's the good cop.
He's the good cop. So by the time, when this person wakes up and tells you, no, we can't negotiate this, unless they're so sure about what they're not going to concede, that they are the ones who are telling you we are not going to concede on this level. And that has happened at the WTO level when they're negotiating with the US. Those are the junior guys who come in and negotiate. By the time it's getting to the main guy who's coming to tell you, oh, by the way, we can change this, believe you me, you've sweated.
So in the case of Kenya, let's say, and the UK, this particular example.
Yes.
So we send our delegation headed by the principal secretary for trade, right?
Yes.
And we have our technical people alongside the PS.
Yes.
Who comes into the room from the UK?
Negotiators. The
Led by
technocrats.
Who's the head of delegation?
Head of delegation, I think, would be the Secretary for Trade.
Okay.
Yes. But it is the negotiators who are doing the actual work.
They're the ones who are doing the talking. And in our case, our negotiators are not doing the work.
At that level, when the Kenya is meeting the UK, it is the PS talking. It is the PS talking, not the other negotiators. Because what they've done, they've concluded everything and given the PS, and then the PS is the one to... yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So they don't have any input as those guys are bringing their input.
No.
So it's basically how we are gaming our game.
Our goose is cooked if we decide, at that level, if you empower these junior officers, and let me tell you, it's not for lack of expertise. Ministry of Trade has people who know what they're doing. It's just that at that level, they tell you, no, we are deferring this decision to the political level. And they are fond of saying that. We are deferring it to political level. And political level is just a question of now you're having the senior honchos coming in to say, okay, let's agree because we really need that market.
Okay.
Yes.
And the senior honcho here is coming to basically push through because the CEO of the country has said we need this deal.
Yes. And that's
of course, the
unfortunate
CEO
thing.
is not looking at the details. He's just saying we need a deal with the UK.
You're given the tail end of, there's a funny, let me try to introduce an aspect of it. And that is where I think lawyers come in. There's a rich man who really wanted to understand the answer to 1 + 1. So he goes to a mathematician and asks him, what is 1 + 1? The mathematician says, before I tell you the answer, you have to tell me, is it base 0, base 1? He says, useless guy, I'm not going to listen to you. He goes to a philosopher and asks him, give me the perfect answer because you're a clever guy. Give me the answer to 1 + 1. Yeah. The guy says, well, before I give you the answer, we first of all have to understand the concept of oneness. What is in one?
What is one?
So he goes to a lawyer and asks him, so what is 1 + 1? The lawyer says, what do you want us to make it? Yeah? So I think the challenge that we have is we start from the fact that we need a legal agreement and say we need an agreement.
Yeah.
So we are starting to answer these questions from the legal standpoint in terms of we need an agreement.
We cannot
And
walk out of this room without an agreement.
and that is a problem.
Right.
You need to first of all ask these other questions so that you can be able to move to this other point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, I think there's certain things that we've established. And I really, as I think about this and I think about development and trade, then
Yes.
moving further on the continent, that there's certain things that then need to happen. And it seems to need to be a bullish approach.
Yes.
Not snobbish, but a bullish approach too. Because when countries on the other side are having these negotiations, as you've said, they are very sure that their markets are protected. They're very sure that their interests are protected. Even when having a polite conversation, you will be very aware that for all intents and purposes, in as much as they want to foster trade with you as a trade partner, they are heavily vested in the protection of their markets, of their industries. And I'm thinking that I'm convinced 100% that if not that or a better approach by this other side needs to be carried out. Like you said, it's incomparable. Where is Kenya on the list? If we're looking at UK at 6, where is Uganda on the list? Where is Rwanda on the list? And if you're going to climb up on that list, whoever made the list, then it is clear that there are certain things that need to be done. If you're going to make sure that Tonanoka steel, for example, is widely used in the region until it becomes something that can then be ex-regional and then ex-continental, is this not then where it begins? To be sure that, hold on a minute, this is great that you have this, but I'm making sure that we use this on this side first before we can then now too begin to move out.
Yes.
To me, it must be a deliberate action.
Yes.
At the risk of not being so, chummy with your ex-Africa partners.
Yes. It will take deliberate action on the part of governments. You need to look at, so why do you think the UK is so interested in the regional market? They're looking at a big market, and you've just recently admitted DRC into it.
Yes.
So they're looking and thinking, you know what? By the way, I need to conclude a deal with these guys
Yeah.
and lock in the market. So if you just wake up and say, you know what? I need to consolidate my market fast before I even get to the point of trying to negotiate with external partners. And that's why we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Yeah. It tries to consolidate the regional market. Now, can you imagine? You've not been able to lock in the EAC market because you negotiated an agreement with the UK.
Yeah.
Then you are not even able to take advantage of the African market because you still have products coming in from the UK that are competing for you to be able to access the other markets. So it's a market of 54 countries. Isn't it better to consolidate a market of 54 countries as opposed to 27?
Sure.
Yes.
That's true. Andrew says the EAC was revived with great fanfare and expense more than 20 years ago and has even expanded membership to include failed states, etc. What tangible benefits have been achieved to justify all this time spent talking about future opportunities?
It's possible to be pessimistic about the dream. But you know what? People forget. You may call them failed states. Are they failed markets? They are not. They are not failed markets.
They are not.
DRC, for all its troubles, by the way, DRC is a perfect market for most of these European countries. So at what point do they decide it's a failed state, and at what point do they decide, you know what, I need to take my products there? They still take their products there.
It can't
Yes.
really be a failed state if you're still doing some kind of negotiation with them. can it
Exactly,
now?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of deals happening. Chris agrees. I think we're having this conversation in reverse. My humble opinion is we should first look inwards and come up with trade agreements as the EAC, and
Yes.
this is what you're arguing this morning. So the rest of the world does not look at Kenya without looking at EAC.
That's the point. That's the point. That, you look, if we are saying the customs union makes us one single market,
Yeah.
why can't we also negotiate as one single market? Because can you imagine the leverage you would have if you bring Tanzania, Uganda, DRC, and everyone else onto the market and say, okay, we're negotiating as one block.
300 million
Yes.
strong markets.
Yes. And we are not going to give you this deal. We are going to give you this other one. They'll still come.
Absolutely.
They'll come.
All right. Edgar, thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay.
We appreciate your coming here. We appreciate your presence and all the good work that you're doing at Eco News Africa.